Hi guys. Tonight we drift north, far north into the biting air of a sea that once broke lesser men. The sky is pale as bone, and your breath turns to frost before you finish exhaling. You stand at the edge of a wooden pier somewhere in 9th century Scandinavia, staring at a ship that looks impossibly slender for what it must face. The water beyond it is half ice, half mirror, and entirely indifferent to your existence. The air smells of pine, tar, and salt. A raven croaks overhead as if to ask whether you're quite sure about this. You probably won't survive this, not really. But that's the beauty of slipping into history you get to try. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, and step onto the longship. The planks sigh under your boots, sticky with pitch that glistens like black ice. Around you, men in cloaks of wool and fur move with quiet precision, coiling ropes, checking the carved oars that will soon pull against freezing waves. Someone laughs a deep, easy sound, but it's quickly swallowed by the moan of the wind. You feel it instantly. The cold that isn't just weather but personality. It crawls into seams, nips at eyelids, probes the gaps between thoughts. Yet the crew barely notice. To them, this sea is not enemy but stage. Their faces are red and raw, their eyes narrowed to slits against the glare. They've done this before many times, and they will do it again. You, on the other hand, pull your cloak tighter, wondering what kind of madness drove anyone to choose this life. The sail unfurls a great woolen rectangle stained with the memory of salt. It snaps once, twice, then catches the wind. The ship shudders, slides free of the ice crusting the shore, and begins to move. Beneath your feet, the hull hums with energy. Vikings called their ships the serpent of the sea, and you understand why. It feels alive, sinuous, aware. The prow's carved dragon head glowers at the horizon as if daring the gods to interfere. The first splash of icy spray hits your face. It burns. You lick your lips and taste salt, wood smoke, and the faint iron tang of blood someone's cracked lip, maybe your own. The sailors laugh at your flinch. They've trained their bodies to accept what nature gives. Wool against skin, fat in their bellies, belief in their hearts. You are among people who carved warmth from the cold itself. It's easy to romanticize them, the heroic explorers, the fearless raiders, but out here, with the temperature plummeting and the sea hissing through gaps in the planks, heroism feels more like stubbornness. Each man and woman aboard has memorized a dance of survival: how to keep toes from blackening, how to sleep sitting up without freezing, how to eat just enough to stay sharp. They know which wood burns slowest, which animals' hides shed water best, and which gods to flatter when the waves grow teeth. One mainstream historical fact: archaeologists have found that these longships were built with overlapping oak planks, called clinker-built hulls, which flexed with the sea instead of fighting it. That flexibility made them astonishingly durable enough to cross the North Atlantic centuries before Columbus ever dreamed of sailing west. You lean over the side. The water below is a swirling black glass, dotted with chunks of ice. It looks soft, almost silky, until you imagine what it would feel like on your skin. There's a reason the sagas spoke of men turned blue before dawn. Yet the Vikings thrived here. They learned to read not just the weather, but the moods of their environment, the sudden silence before a squall, the way a gull's cry changes pitch before snow. Historians still argue whether they inherited these instincts from generations of coastal farmers or developed them through sheer necessity. A quirky tidbit: some sagas mention sailors carrying small, enchanted stones, sunstones that could find the sun's position even through fog or cloud. Scientists now think they may have used Iceland spar, a crystal that polarizes light and indeed helps locate the hidden Sunday. You imagine a bearded navigator squinting through his translucent talisman, finding direction in what seems chaos. As the ship slides further into open water, the wind deepens. It whistles between the oars, ruffles the fur collars, and tugs at your hood like a mischievous child. The rhythm of rowing begins. Slow, steady, hypnotic. Wood creaks, muscles groan. The men hum to keep time. Low chants that blend with the slap of waves, until it sounds like the sea itself is singing. You glance back toward shore, now just a thin white line on the horizon. There's no turning back, not until landfall somewhere unknown. You imagine nights under shifting stars, frost hardening the ropes, breath forming ghostly shapes above sleeping bodies. You imagine what it must feel like to wake to snow crusting your beard, to see your shipmates smiling through it as though frost were no more troublesome than morning dew. The Viking idea of endurance wasn't bravado, it was routine. To them, cold was simply a condition of life, like hunger or wind. A child in a coastal village learned early. Never let wool stay wet. Always share warmth with your companions. Keep your act dry and your faith drier. This was social knowledge passed mouth to ear, generation to generation, until it became reflex. And yet, for all their toughness, they weren't immune to awe. Sometimes, when the aurora rippled above like serpents of green fire, they paused mid-voyage just to stare. You can almost hear the whisper, "The gods are dancing tonight." You feel the same shiver not from cold now, but from the smallness of being human beneath something so vast. The night closes in. Somewhere ahead lies a horizon you cannot see, only sense. The crew ties down the sail, stows the oars, and huddles close, the air alive with their quiet murmurs. One man strums a lyre, the notes trembling like starlight. The sound fades into the wind, and the rhythm of the sea takes over once more. You stand, cloak pulled close, eyes watering from the cold, and think, how did they do it? How did they survive this endless, freezing expanse without so much as a heater or insulated boot? The answer, as you'll soon discover, lies in their craft, their customs, and their curious blend of faith and practicality. For now, you simply listen to the creak of wood, the hiss of the sea, and the heartbeat of a civilization built on endurance. The longship glides forward, carving a path between ice and legend. You breathe in the salt, exhale the warmth of your own breath, and realize the voyage has only just begun. The morning after that first shivering night, you wake beneath a sky the color of pewter. The sea rolls slow and heavy, each swell gleaming with a film of ice. Your cloak is stiff with frost, and when you move, it cracks softly, like thin glass. You rub your hands together, remembering what warmth felt like. The Vikings beside you seem untouched by it all. They stretch, yawn, and laugh as if this grey world were their favorite season. They had a secret, and it was not magic, it was fabric, layer upon layer of human ingenuity woven from wool, fur, and hide. You watch a sailor rewrap his legs in bands of thick wool called winningars. Another tucks his beard inside a sealskin hood. They dress not for appearance, but for survival, and every layer tells a story of skill, trade, and experience. Wool was their miracle. It was not just any wool, but that of hardy northern sheep whose coats grew thick and oily. The outer layer repelled water, and the inner fibers trapped air for insulation. Even when soaked, good wool stayed warm. You touch a sleeve and feel the weight of it rough, dense, alive with the faint smell of lanolin. That natural grease kept the fibers water-resistant and the sailors from freezing. Underneath the wool, most wore linen shirts next to the skin, soft and breathable. Above it came tunics, cloaks, and sometimes fur. A rich man might wear fox or sable, while others used sheepskin turned inside out. You notice how the seams are neatly stitched with sinew or wool thread, and the edges bound tight to block the wind. There were no zippers, no buttons, no logos, only purpose. One mainstream historical fact: fragments of Viking textiles found in graves at Birka and Hedeby reveal surprisingly complex weaving patterns. Some pieces used diamond twills, a technique that made the cloth both strong and flexible. These were not crude furs thrown over shoulders, but carefully crafted garments made by skilled hands, often dyed with natural pigments that still faintly show after 1,000 years. A quirky tidbit drifts through your mind. To waterproof their cloaks, Vikings sometimes rubbed them with fish oil. It worked, though it made the clothing smell like a dockyard stew. You imagine the scent brine, smoke, and something distinctly animal mixing with the salt of the sea. No wonder the sagas describe heroes whose presence reached you before they spoke. You sit beside a woman mending a tear in her cloak. She is calm, needle flashing, her fingers red from the cold. She hums softly, a tune you do not recognize but that feels ancient. When you ask how she endures the chill, she shrugs. The cold keeps you awake, she says, and if you sleep too long, it will keep you forever. The crew laughs quietly at her grim humor. Historians still debate whether Vikings had separate winter and summer wardrobes, or if they simply layered more during the colder months. The evidence suggests both. Excavations show heavier garments and thicker cloaks buried with northern settlers, while coastal traders seem to favor lighter outfits. You realize how much the environment shaped them, forcing creativity with limited materials. Someone passes you a bundle of dried moss. It is used like insulation, stuffed into boots or under tunics to trap heat. In a pinch, they even used it as a crude sponge or bandage. You rub it between your fingers and feel how springy it is, how easily it absorbs moisture. The smallest things became tools of survival. You catch the scent of tallow-rendered animal fat used to waterproof boots and soften leather. One man dips a strip of hide into a pot of it, then winds it around his wrist like armor. His fingers, scarred and cracked, move with practiced care. Nothing goes to waste. Bones become needles, intestines become cord, fat becomes balm. Every scrap of nature is bent toward warmth. The ship groans as it meets a sudden gust. Spray arcs high, glittering like shattered glass, then falls across the deck. It soaks your face, but the crew hardly react. Their cloaks shed water like a duck's back. You can see how the overlapping layers direct the water downward, never inward. The wool drinks up what it must, but never surrenders its warmth. You realize how social this knowledge is. Someone taught them to weave this way, to tie knots that hold in wind, to wrap hands in cloth just loose enough to trap air. These are lessons passed from grandmother to mother to son, embedded in memory long before books or diagrams. A seam can be heritage, a fold of fabric, a signature. Even their headgear carries meaning. Under fur caps or hoods, many wore simple woolen bands to cover ears and forehead. The Vikings understood that heat leaves the body fastest from the head. When the temperature dropped further, they pulled cloaks over their faces, breathing through the fabric. You copy the gesture and find that the wool catches the moisture of your breath, warming it slightly before it touches your skin again. It feels primitive and clever at once. Someone joked that the gods wear nothing at all, and that is why they created humans to remind themselves what cold feels like. The crew chuckles. Their laughter carried off by the wind. You sense that humor is also insulation. Hours later, as the sun slides behind clouds like molten iron, the chill deepens. You notice that the men move constantly, shifting weight, swinging arms, stamping feet. Stillness invites frostbite. Movement makes heat. It is an unspoken rule of the sea. Keep working, keep living. A fisherman tells you that sealskin gloves are best for gripping oars, because the natural oil keeps them supple even when wet. Another swears by boots lined with dried grass, a trick that lets the moisture escape instead of pooling. You realize that every layer, every object, carries centuries of trial and error. They have mastered warmth, not by fighting the cold, but by understanding it. You close your eyes for a moment and listen to the rhythm of the ship, the slap of waves, the creak of rope. The wool against your skin is rough but comforting, like the voice of an old friend. The smell of fur and smoke wraps around you, heavy and familiar. For the first time, the cold feels distant, almost respectful. You are learning what the Vikings knew. Warmth is not just heat. It is motion, craft, memory, and shared endurance. It is the knowledge that while the sea may bite, you can bite back in your own quiet way. The horizon darkens again. The crew pull their hoods tight and ready the oars. You feel the weight of the cloak on your shoulders and understand that it is not just clothing. It is armor, woven from the patience of a people who refuse to freeze. The sea is cruel in its calmness. The next day, when the wind dies and the ship drifts over water smooth as polished stone, you almost forget how cold it is. Then you touch the railing, and the wood bites back with a chill that seeps straight through your palm. Every surface here stores the cold like a memory. Yet somehow, the Vikings had ways to create warmth where none should exist. You follow a sailor toward the ship's center, where a small blackened pit sits between rows of shields. It is nothing grand, just a hollow lined with flat stones, each dark with soot. Beside it lies a pot, a few lumps of charcoal, and a skin of animal fat that gleams like amber. This, you realize, is their hearth, the heart of warmth aboard a ship made for ice. When conditions allowed, they lit small fires here. Not blazing ones, but controlled embers surrounded by stones that absorbed heat. The stones stayed warm for hours, radiating gentle warmth into cold fingers and stiff faces. The sailors call it sea fire. Smoke rose through gaps in the planks or escaped through the open deck, and when the air grew too thick, they doused it and relied on stored heat alone. One mainstream historical fact is that Viking ships sometimes carried portable braziers, shallow iron boxes filled with coals. Archaeological finds in Denmark and Norway confirm their use. These devices provided just enough warmth for cooking or thawing limbs without risking the ship itself. Fire on wood was a dangerous friend, but a necessary one. A quirky tidbit follows as you watch. Some sagas mention sailors warming stones in fires on shore before departure, then wrapping them in hides and bringing them aboard. These stones release their heat slowly through the first freezing night. It seems a small comfort, but on a sea like this, small comforts can mean survival. Historians still argue whether crews actually slept near these hearths or avoided them for fear of sparks. The sagas give conflicting hints. Some describe shared warmth around embers. Others speak of smouldering ashes carefully tended through the night. You picture it both ways. The faint orange glow flickering over faces half hidden in steam and smoke. Someone hands you a strip of dried fish fried in animal fat. It tastes salty, rich, and faintly smoky. The fat coats your tongue and burns warmly down your throat. You realize that heat can live inside food too. These sailors carried barrels of tallow and seal fat, not just to eat but to burn. In a shallow lamp, a wick made of twisted linen would float on the surface, providing dim light and a hint of warmth. You crouch closer to the pit and feel the heat rising in faint pulses. It is not enough to chase the cold away, but it softens it, the way a candle softens darkness. Around you, men repair ropes and women patch sails. The air smells of pitch, smoke, and salt, a perfume of persistence. One man dips his hand in the fat skin and rubs a thin layer across his face. It glistens in the weak light. Keeps the wind from cutting, he explains. You mimic him, and the sensation surprises you. The fat forms a barrier, greasy but effective, sealing your skin against the air. The Vikings did this often, coating hands, cheeks, and even nostrils to prevent frostbite. You can almost feel your pores sigh in relief. There is a rhythm to their survival. Fire warms the stones. Stones warm the people. The people work to keep the fire alive. In that cycle lies a kind of faith, not in gods this time, but in materials. Heat is precious currency, traded carefully between man, rock, and air. As you look around, you notice how the crew arrange themselves. The youngest cluster nearest the hearth, while veterans lean against the outer planks, trusting their layers of wool and experience. They talk in low voices, sharing tales to pass the time. One speaks of a storm so fierce it tore the sail to ribbons and froze their beards solid. We laughed, he says. If you stop laughing, you stop breathing. The others nod. You imagine what it would be like when storms struck and fire was impossible. In those times, the hearth turned silent, and warmth came only from shared bodies. They huddled close, wrapped in cloaks, pressed shoulder to shoulder. Even strangers became companions when the wind roared like a beast. The ship rocks gently now, the sound of waves soft and steady. You close your eyes trying to memorize it. The crackle of embers, the creak of the mast, the whisper of breath. For a moment, it feels safe, almost home-like. You realize that warmth is not just physical here, it is emotional, collective. No one survives the freezing sea alone. A sailor named Bjorn begins to hum. The tune is low and repetitive, matching the rhythm of the waves. Soon others join in, their voices rising like the sea itself. The chant fills the cold air, vibrating through the hull. It feels like another kind of heat, one that comes from within. Historians often underestimate how psychological warmth matters. The Vikings understood that fear makes you cold. Laughter, song, and movement, these were their real defenses. You hum along quietly, feeling the vibration in your chest, and the chill that had settled there begins to ease. As the day fades, they cover the fire with a flat stone to trap the remaining heat. The light dims to a red eye in the center of the deck. Shadows lengthen, and the crew curl into their cloaks. The smell of smoke clings to everything, even the sky. You sit with your back against a warm stone, your fingers thawing slowly. You realize how primitive this feels, and yet how ingenious. No heaters, no electricity, only knowledge and patience. The Vikings had turned their ship into a living organism, one that breathed smoke, fed on fat, and shared its warmth through every plank and body aboard. When the stars appear, they shimmer as if frozen in place. The sea mirrors them perfectly, and you cannot tell where sky ends or water begins. Your reflection looks back at you, ghostly and pale, wrapped in fur and firelight. The night deepens. The hearth's last glow fades to ash. You pull your cloak tight, knowing that tomorrow will bring more cold, more wind, more lessons in endurance. But for now, you feel a strange peace. The Vikings did not just fight the cold. They learned to live alongside it, to draw from it a kind of quiet strength. You close your eyes, listening to the sea breathe under you, and imagine the heat still pulsing in the stones. The ship drifts on, carrying its tiny pocket of warmth through an endless field of ice. The morning begins with a hard wind and a sour smell of salt and sweat. You are learning that life aboard this ship is not only about surviving the cold, but also surviving each other. The sea leaves little room for comfort or modesty. When the wind freezes the water in your hair and salt crusts your clothes, you begin to understand that hygiene is a luxury, not a habit. The Vikings knew this truth well. They did not have soap as you know it, nor any privacy to wash in. Instead, they relied on the sea itself. You watch as one sailor dips a rag into icy water and wipes his face without flinching. His skin turns red, his expression calm, as if the cold stings him awake. Salt water was their mirror, their medicine, and their cleanser. Archaeological evidence shows that combs and tweezers were common grave goods in Viking burials. These were made of bone, antler, or ivory, and suggest that grooming still mattered even amid grime. To the Vikings, neat hair and a clean beard were signs of pride and strength. They might be smeared with sweat, but they refused to look defeated by the sea. According to a curious legend, some sailors rubbed ashes and animal fat into their hair to make it stiff against the wind. It worked, and perhaps also kept lice at bay. You can imagine the scene: men with grey streaked hair and glistening beards, the smell of smoke and tallow clinging to them like armor. Experts still debate how often these voyagers truly washed. Some argue they bathed weekly when near fresh water, while others believe such chances were rare and precious. The sagas mention Saturday as washing day, which hints that cleanliness had both routine and ritual. Even so, here, in the middle of the sea, every effort at hygiene is an act of courage. You look around the deck. Salt crystals shine on cloaks like frost. The planks are slick with seawater and oil. A woman scrapes the deck with a piece of broken shell, humming to herself as she works. The smell of wet wool and smoke fills your lungs, heavy but strangely comforting. Sweat, too, was part of their warmth. The act of rowing, hauling ropes, or hammering nails kept blood moving. Their bodies became their furnaces. When a man stops working, another shouts for him to move. Rest means cold. Motion means life. It is a constant negotiation between exhaustion and survival. Someone passes a small pot filled with herbs soaked in oil. They dab it under their noses. The scent is sharp, almost sweet. When you ask, they explain it masks the stench of fish and bodies. The mixture likely includes juniper, pine, or even mint. These plants were known to the Norse for their cleansing and soothing properties. You take a whiff, and suddenly the air feels less oppressive. Records from the period confirm that Vikings carried herbs like thyme and angelica for both flavor and health. These were their deodorizers, antibiotics, and breath fresheners all in one. Out here, such small details meant dignity. In the still moments between waves, the sounds of the ship grow intimate. You hear the scrape of combs through hair, the click of bone against bone, the quiet murmur of conversation. It feels domestic, almost tender. These people, often imagined as savage raiders, are instead careful and orderly in their routines. Dirt is inevitable, but filth is not fate. Someone laughs at your cautious movements. You'll learn, he says. The sea gives what it takes. Sweat, salt, and sleep all the same thing out here. His grin shows a gap where two teeth once were. You smile back, realizing that humor again is survival. As the day stretches on, the smell of bodies grows stronger, then strangely disappears as your senses adapt. You feel your own skin roughen, your hair stiffen, your lips split at the corners. The sea is remaking you into one of them. You have learned not to flinch at the grime, nor to seek comfort where none exists. No one fully agrees how they endured such conditions for weeks. Some researchers claim the cold suppressed bacterial growth, keeping infection rare. Others believe their strong immune systems and simple diets played a part. Either way, it is clear that the Vikings' relationship with their bodies was practical, not sentimental. They accepted discomfort as part of existence, not an enemy to fight. That night, the deck is quiet. The smell of tar mixes with the faint aroma of herbs and smoke. A sailor combs his hair by moonlight, the teeth of his comb catching on tangles. He pauses, flicks the strands into the sea, and grins as if to say, "Let the ocean keep it." You realize that here, even the act of cleaning is shared with nature. You stretch your aching limbs and breathe the cold air. Your body feels raw but alive, your senses sharpened. Every touch, every smell, every sound is part of a single tapestry of survival. The Vikings did not separate life from the elements. They blended into them. You lie back and close your eyes. The deck creaks beneath you like a slow heartbeat. Sweat and salt cling to your skin, but you no longer care. The cold presses close. Yet you are warm in the only way that matters, from movement, from laughter, from simply being part of this stubborn tribe of the sea. The next morning, the sea looks like steel. Clouds hang low, heavy and grey, and the world feels smaller, quieter. Yet there is movement everywhere. The flutter of a sail, the groan of oars, the sharp cry of a gull far above. You stand near the prow and watch as the horizon shifts with each rise of the waves. There are no maps here, only memory and instinct. The Vikings read the sky and the sea the way others read books. Archaeological evidence from ship burials and coastal settlements shows that these sailors carried few navigation tools, no compasses, no detailed charts. Instead, they relied on what nature offered: the direction of the wind, the pattern of waves, and the flight paths of birds. You try to imagine memorizing a world this way, not as lines and numbers, but as sensations. According to a strange story told in the sagas, one captain released a raven from a cage to find land. If the bird returned, they were still far from shore. If it flew ahead and never came back, they followed its path. The tale sounds simple, but it captures something true. The Vikings trusted their surroundings like a living guide. There is disagreement among researchers about how exactly they read the weather. Some say they used the color of sunlight on water to predict wind changes, while others suggest they felt the air pressure in their bones. You can see why the debate remains unsettled. These were people attuned to details too small to record, sensations that lived in muscle and instinct. The sailor beside you squints at the clouds. "Storm in a day," he mutters. The others nod. You look up but see nothing unusual. Then you notice how the gulls have gone silent and the water feels thicker under the hull. A shiver runs down your spine that has nothing to do with cold. They begin to prepare without hurry, each person moving as if following an invisible script. Sails are adjusted, ropes checked, shields pulled close to the edge for protection. You realize this quiet efficiency is its own kind of language. No orders shouted, no panic, only trust in one another and in the sea's rhythm. Records from the medieval period describe Viking navigators as sea-wise. That phrase, simple as it is, carries weight. They did not dominate the sea, they understood it. They watched the color of clouds at dawn, the sparkle of plankton at night, even the way whales traveled. Nature's signs became their compass. One peculiar habit mentioned in oral tradition involves tasting seawater. By sampling the water, experienced sailors claimed they could tell if land was near. Fresh water from rivers subtly altered the salt balance. You hesitate to believe it until you try. The taste is sharp, briny, and unfamiliar, yet you can almost imagine detecting something new, a faint sweetness that hints at land. The conversation around you turns to wind. The helmsman speaks softly, pointing with his chin toward a distant line on the horizon. He seems to see something invisible. "Southwest," he says, and the crew adjust the sail. The ropes creak, the wood groans, and the ship responds like a living creature. You begin to notice how sound shapes their world. The slap of waves against the hull, the rustle of the sail, the whistle of air through ropes, all these form a language of warning. The Vikings heard meaning in noises you might overlook. When the sea hissed, it signaled icy spray. When it boomed hollow beneath the hull, it meant deep water. A faint drizzle begins to fall. The droplets sting your face, cold and sharp. You wipe your eyes, but the crew ignore it. One of them murmurs that rain before noon means fair weather by night. You wonder how many generations it took to learn that pattern. Historians note that Viking navigators also studied the flight of seabirds, especially puffins and gulls. They knew these birds returned to shore in the evening, so if flocks circled low and then vanished, it meant land was close. You imagine the relief of spotting a single bird after weeks of empty sky, a fluttering promise of home. An older sailor shows you something that looks like a translucent crystal. It catches the dim light and scatters it in pale streaks. "Sunstone," he says. He holds it toward the grey sky, turns it slowly, and nods. "There," he adds. The sun hides, but the stone finds it. Scientists today have found that certain minerals can polarize light, making the sun's direction visible even through thick clouds. The trick was real, not just legend. By late afternoon, the drizzle stops, leaving the deck glistening. The air smells clean, almost metallic. The sailors move easily, confident that the storm will pass them by. You realize how knowledge becomes comfort here. Where you see chaos, they see a map. The ship glides through pale water, and the wind hums low in the rigging. You can feel how the Vikings shaped their lives around this sound, how it must have sung in their dreams. They lived by its mood, trusted it more than any star. As night falls, the clouds thin, and a faint band of colour stretches across the horizon. The helmsman smiles, satisfied. Good weather after all, he says. You feel warmth in his certainty, the kind that comes from mastery, not temperature. You look up at the sky, now dusted with faint stars. Each one seems to whisper of another voyage, another frozen dawn. The sea has become a teacher, and you are only beginning to understand its lessons. The next day begins with hunger. It is a soft ache at first, just an emptiness that hums quietly beneath the ribs. The cold makes it worse, feeding on your body's warmth. You watch the crew stir to life as grey light spills across the deck. Someone opens a wooden chest and the smell of dried fish fills the air. It is sharp, salty, and strangely sweet. Breakfast has arrived. Excavations at Viking settlements in Greenland and Iceland reveal that these sailors carried simple but clever provisions. Dried or smoked fish, hard bread, cheese hardened to stone, and barrels of preserved meat were their staples. They ate to survive, not to delight. Each meal was designed to last weeks without spoiling, even when frozen solid. According to an old account written centuries later, they sometimes boiled seaweed to thicken stews. It added salt and texture, and in lean times, kept bellies full. You imagine that smell, earthy and oceanic, curling through the cold air. There is disagreement among scholars about how much variety their diets truly had. Some suggest they lived mostly on fish, while others argue they carried grain for porridge and even small stores of dried fruit. Either way, their meals were shaped by the sea and by necessity. Nothing fancy, everything functional. You sit beside a sailor who is cutting thin strips of dried cod with a knife worn smooth from years of sharpening. He dips it in melted butter that glows golden in the morning light. Good for strength, he says. You take a bite. It is chewy, salty, and rich with fat. It feels like eating warmth itself. Fat was their secret weapon against the cold. Whale blubber, seal fat, and butter were all prized. These dense calories burned slowly inside the body, keeping heat where it mattered most. Without them, even the strongest warrior would shiver into weakness. Archaeological findings confirm that Vikings carried barrels of butter and kegs of animal fat on long voyages. In icy waters, these were worth more than gold. You can see why. Every mouthful is energy, every spoonful a small fire against the cold. An odd custom mentioned in the sagas describes sailors trading chunks of dried fish the way others trade coins. It was both food and currency. To share it meant friendship. To withhold it could start a feud. You look around and see this small economy in action. One man handing another a piece of smoked herring, a quiet gesture of trust. As the day lengthens, cooking begins. A small brazier is lit, shielded from the wind. The cook adds dried meat, onions, and water into an iron pot. The smell rises slowly, smoky and comforting. Steam curls through the air, softening faces and voices alike. You realize how powerful food can be when the world is frozen around you. A woman ladles out broth into wooden bowls. The first sip burns your tongue, but you welcome the pain. The warmth spreads downward, slow and steady, reaching places the fire never could. It is nourishment, yes, but also reassurance. The Vikings carried no heaters, no blankets thick enough to fight the northern chill. Their warmth came from what they ate, what they believed, and who they were beside. Records from Iceland mention fermented shark, a delicacy born of desperation. Buried in sand for months, it transformed from poison to sustenance. The idea makes your stomach twist, yet you admire the ingenuity. When nothing grows and the sea is ice, survival demands invention. You watch the cook scrape the last bits from the pot, then pour in melted tallow to seal it against air. Even waste becomes resource. Every drop of fat, Every crumb of bread matters. The crew joke that Odin himself blessed the butter, for without it, half of them would freeze before spring. Researchers remain divided on whether alcohol was regularly consumed at sea. Some argue that small barrels of ale or mead were carried for morale and hydration. Others think fresh water was more valuable. Whatever the truth, someone now uncorks a skin and passes it around. The liquid is warm, spiced with honey, and burns in your throat. The laughter that follows feels like another kind of heat. As the sun dips low, you see how food brings rhythm to their lives. Work stops for meals, conversation softens, and for a few minutes, the endless ocean seems far away. They eat, wipe their mouths, and smile. It is a simple ritual, but it binds them together as surely as rope binds the mast. The cold returns quickly once the last bowl is emptied. The brazier goes out, and breath becomes visible again. Yet something in you has shifted. You understand now that warmth is not always something you find outside yourself. Sometimes it grows within, sparked by nourishment, by gratitude, by the small fire of being alive. You lean against the side of the ship and look at the stars just beginning to appear. The taste of salt and butter lingers on your lips. Around you, the crew settles into quiet murmurs, their bellies full and spirits steady. You think of how these same stars once looked down on other voyages, other meals, other laughter shared over steaming pots. The wind sighs, the sea hums, and the ship glides forward. The warmth of the meal still glows in your chest, defying the chill. You close your eyes and listen to the faint clatter of bowls, the low hum of satisfaction, and the ancient rhythm of survival that has fed humankind since the first fire was lit. The days blur together now, a rhythm of wind, water, and waking cold. Each morning you open your eyes to a world that looks the same but feels slightly different. The air sharpens, the sky grows heavier, and your breath turns to silver mist. Survival here is not just a matter of strength, it is a battle of the mind. You begin to see it in their faces. The Vikings move with purpose, but behind their eyes lies something harder to define. It is focus, yes, but also calm. They have accepted the cold as part of existence. You realize that this acceptance is what separates them from others who would crumble beneath such frost. Historical writings and saga fragments suggest that Norse sailors trained themselves mentally for hardship from childhood. Winter was their teacher. Children learned to endure discomfort, to work in snow, to walk barefoot on frozen ground for brief moments, just to toughen skin and spirit. Pain was not punishment, but preparation. According to one Old Norse poem, better to be burnt than frozen, for fire leaves ashes, but ice takes memory. The line lingers in your mind as you watch a man repair his oar with numb fingers. He hums softly, as if the task itself keeps him sane. There is still debate among historians about whether these people saw endurance as virtue or simple necessity. Some believe it was tied to their pagan beliefs, where suffering earned divine favor. Others think it was merely the logic of survival in a world that offered no mercy. Whatever the truth, you can feel it in their movements. Calm persistence, never complaint. You sit beside a young sailor whose face is pale with cold. He grins when you ask if he ever feels afraid. Fear wastes warmth, he says. You cannot tell if he is joking, but you understand him. Anxiety burns energy, and energy is life. Archaeological findings hint at the role of communal spirit in this endurance. Burial sites often contain pairs or groups of individuals, suggesting shared identity even in death. It reflects a worldview where personal survival was tied to the well-being of the group. Alone, one froze. Together, they endured. A curious practice mentioned in some sagas describes warriors deliberately sleeping without cloaks for a night before voyages, calling it the cold trial. It tested resolve and taught the body to adapt. You shiver at the thought, but you also admire the strange discipline. As night falls, you feel the weight of exhaustion. The mind begins to wander toward thoughts of home, of warm fires and soft beds. You imagine what homesickness must have meant to them, far from land for weeks. Perhaps they turned it into strength, imagining their families not as a comfort lost, but as a reason to keep rowing. The ship rocks gently, and the world fades into a blur of grey and blue. You close your eyes and listen to murmurs of conversation drifting through the cold air. Some tell stories of raids and kings, others recite verses from memory. The act of storytelling itself becomes a shield against despair. Written sources describe how poetry and song were vital to Viking culture. Reciting a saga was more than entertainment. It was identity reaffirmed. It reminded each listener who they were, even when the sea tried to erase them. You feel that truth now. Each word is warmth, each laugh a spark in the darkness. A man named Torvald begins to sing quietly. His voice is rough but steady, rising and falling with the rhythm of the waves. The song speaks of frost and fire, of ships lost and souls reborn. You cannot understand every word, yet the melody wraps around you like a blanket. There is uncertainty among modern researchers about whether such songs were spontaneous or memorized. Some think the verses changed with each voyage, reshaped by wind and memory. You like that idea? That every song carried pieces of other winters, other survivors? The mind adapts to the cold, you realize. At first it resists, then it learns to flow with it, to make peace. The body shakes, but the mind steadies. This balance is what keeps the Vikings alive. They do not try to defeat the cold, they make it part of their rhythm. You try it yourself. You breathe deeply, feel the sting in your lungs and stop fighting it. The pain softens into awareness. The cold becomes less enemy, more companion. For a moment, you feel what they must have felt, a strange calmness, a quiet pride in simply existing within the storm. The night grows still. The only sound is the sigh of the wind and the slow creak of the hull. You lie back, cloak pulled tight, and watch frost form delicate veins across the wood. Your thoughts drift, slower now, softer. You realize that this is not misery. It is endurance turned to art. You remember the saying of an old sailor earlier that day, "Fire fades, but ice remembers." You think about what that means. Perhaps every frozen night, every bitter voyage, leaves its mark not only on the body, but on history itself. The cold preserves both flesh and memory. You close your eyes, feeling both fragile and eternal, carried forward by a ship of stubborn hearts and steady hands. The Viking mind is not warm, but it is alive, glowing quietly against the endless dark. The dawn breaks pale and trembling, a faint light spilling through mist so thick you can taste it. The sea is quieter today, heavy with fog. Every sound is softened. The creak of wood, the flap of canvas, even voices come muffled, as if spoken from underwater. The crew moves more slowly now, conserving energy and whispering to one another in low tones. You notice something different in the air, a kind of reverence. The Vikings were not just sailors and fighters, they were believers. Every voyage began with rituals to honor the gods of wind and sea. Before this one, they must have poured mead into the water for Njord, the god of the ocean, and perhaps left tokens for Thor, whose hammer guarded travelers from storms. Faith, to them, was not distant or abstract. It was a partnership with the forces that surrounded them. Archaeological discoveries of carved amulets shaped like Thor's hammer show that these symbols were not decoration. They were portable prayers, carried around necks, tucked into cloaks, sometimes tied to the mast itself. You spot one now, swinging gently from the rigging, its silver surface darkened with age. The sailor who hung it there glances at it often, as if it listens back. According to a strange account preserved in Icelandic lore, some captains sacrificed a small animal before setting sail, believing its blood would calm the waves. Whether this was symbolic or literal remains uncertain, but the intention is clear. Survival was both physical and spiritual labor. Experts remain divided on how deeply the average Viking believed in these rites. Some argue that rituals were mostly tradition, kept alive out of respect for ancestry. Others suggest that, on the open sea, where death could come from a single rogue wave, faith became tangible. You can see why. Out here, the ocean itself feels alive, watching, waiting. As fog thickens, the crew grows quiet. One man mutters a charm against drowning. Another rubs a bead between his fingers, whispering a name you cannot catch. The air hums faintly with murmured words and the crackle of superstition. The Vikings saw the world as layered. Above was Asgard, realm of gods and warriors. Beneath, the underworld ruled by Hel. Between them stretched Midgard, the human world, a fragile bridge of earth and water. The sea was both path and peril, a border where spirits moved freely. Every voyage was, in a sense, a crossing between worlds. An odd tale told in a Greenland saga speaks of sailors seeing lights under the waves, which they believed were spirits of drowned men guiding them home. Some modern scientists think these lights could have been bioluminescent plankton, but the sailors saw souls, not science. Their world was full of meaning where yours might see only mystery. The ship glides slowly through the mist. The sound of the sea becomes a heartbeat beneath your feet. You feel the line blur between fear and faith, between what you can touch and what you only sense. Perhaps belief itself was a kind of warmth, a fire that burned in the mind when the body could no longer fight the cold. Records from the period mention that sailors carved protective runes into the wood of their ships. These runes, cut with knives or burned into the hull, called on divine favor for safe passage. You trace your fingers along a faint carving near the bow. The symbol looks like a jagged arrow, a rune known as algiz, meaning protection. You feel a chill that is not just from the air. Someone begins to sing, low and steady. It is not a song for entertainment, but invocation. The melody rises and falls like the waves themselves, slow, circular, hypnotic. The words call upon the old gods to guard their path and freeze the hands of enemies. The voices blend together until it becomes something ancient, almost elemental. Researchers note that collective chanting helped regulate rhythm on long voyages, but it also had psychological weight. Singing united the crew, synchronized their hearts, and pushed away fear. You sense it working even now. The air feels lighter, the fog less oppressive. As the song fades, silence returns. The mist thins just enough for you to see faint sunlight spreading across the sea. The Viking beside you smiles, teeth flashing white in his frost-dark beard. "The gods are pleased," he says simply. You want to ask how he knows, but you already feel the same truth. The fear has lessened. The horizon has returned. A faint smell of smoke drifts up as they light a small lamp near the mast. Its flame flickers, fragile against the grey. Someone places a pinch of dried herbs into it, and a thin curl of scented smoke rises, carrying whispers skyward. You realize this is a kind of prayer too, a way of sending gratitude into the air. Modern historians interpret these rituals as more than superstition. They were tools for emotional survival. Faith gave meaning to suffering, structure to chaos, and courage to the frightened. On a sea that could swallow them at any moment, the Vikings found control in belief. You close your eyes and listen to the rhythm of the water against the hull. The fog continues to lift, revealing faint sunlight that gleams like silver on the ripples. You imagine that somewhere in this light, the gods listen still, amused, or perhaps proud of their frostbitten children below. When you open your eyes again, the mist is gone. The crew move with renewed energy, shoulders straighter, voices stronger. Whether their prayers were answered or simply heard by themselves, it does not matter. The result is the same. The voyage continues, and hope travels with it. By the time the next sunrise creeps across the horizon, the fog has lifted completely. What remains is the gleam of the ship itself, the long and graceful body that has carried you through frost and fear. You start to see it not as a vessel, but as a companion. Its timbers creak like breath, and when the waves strike, it shivers as though alive. This is where much of the Vikings' true warmth begins, in their craftsmanship. Archaeological studies of ship graves, such as those at Oseberg and Gokstad, reveal a level of engineering that astonished even modern builders. Every plank overlaps its neighbour, fastened with iron rivets that flex with sea's movement. The technique, called clinker construction, allows the hull to bend rather than break. You run your hand along one of the seams, feeling the rhythm of human skill in every groove. According to old descriptions preserved in Norse sagas, each ship was named as though it were a living being. Some bore fierce titles like Sea Serpent or Wave Stallion. The idea was not poetry alone. It reflected the belief that a ship had spirit, breath, and memory. Before the first voyage, builders offered blessings to awaken that spirit and protect its crew. There is still disagreement among historians about how widespread these ship blessings were. Some think they were rare, reserved for great voyages or chieftains. Others argue that even small boats received simple rites. Whether grand or humble, each ship embodied years of collective knowledge shaped by survival. Excavations also suggest that builders selected wood with almost spiritual care: oak for the keel, pine for the planks, birch for small fittings. Each tree was chosen in winter when sap ran low, making the timber less likely to rot. The choice itself became part of the ship's soul. You imagine the scent of sawdust and resin in a snowy forest as hands shaped destiny from living wood. One curious find near a fjord in Norway revealed traces of animal hair and tar mixed into the seams. Scholars think the Vikings used whatever they had to waterproof the hull, from sheep's wool to reindeer fat. The result was a flexible sealant that resisted both water and ice. The ship you stand on must carry that same scent: pine, tar, and faint musk. It is oddly comforting, like smoke on a winter night. A sailor beside you points to the carved prow, the dragon's head rising high and proud. Its eyes gleam faintly, polished by salt and time. "She watches," he says. You nod, knowing he means it. To him, the ship is not an object. It is guardian, home, and weapon, all at once. Contemporary accounts from distant cultures describe how Viking ships appeared terrifying on the horizon. The curved prow seemed alive, leaping through waves as if eager for battle. You can see how such craftsmanship would have struck awe into those who saw it for the first time. Yet from within, it feels tender, a creation of balance between strength and grace. An odd custom mentioned in old seafaring tales speaks of sailors whispering thanks to their ships after surviving storms. They would touch the hull and promise repairs or offerings once ashore. It was a conversation between maker and creation, gratitude carved in silence. You find yourself tempted to do the same, resting your hand on the warm wood as if it might hear. Researchers still puzzle over how the Vikings kept their ships from icing over. Some think they scraped frost with blades and oars, while others believe they coated the planks with oil before voyages. Either way, maintenance was constant. Each sailor was both warrior and caretaker, tending to the ship like family. You walk along the deck and notice how every feature is purposeful. The planks rise slightly toward the center to allow water to drain. The benches double as storage, hiding spare ropes and tools. Even the sail, thick with wool, traps pockets of air that soften the wind's assault. Every detail speaks of minds that knew the sea's cruelty and planned for mercy. When the wind picks up, the ship answers with a deep moan that vibrates through your feet. It feels almost like a voice, ancient and tired but loyal. You imagine how many storms it must have survived, how many prayers have soaked into its grain. The thought humbles you. Historical experts describe these ships as extensions of their builder's identity. To craft one was to declare mastery over both material and fate. Each hammer strike was a promise of return. The longship, in this sense, was the Vikings' most profound invention, not just a tool of war or trade, but a bridge between human will and the endless cold. You sit near the prow, where the wood is dry and sun-warmed. The dragonhead casts a long shadow across the water. Beneath you, the hull moves like muscle, flexing with each wave. You realize that this is warmth of another kind, the warmth of confidence in one's creation. The Vikings trusted their ships as you might trust your heartbeat. As night settles again, stars emerge, glittering like frost scattered across velvet. The ship glides quietly beneath them, a dark silhouette against silver light. You run your hand once more along the wooden rail, tracing the grooves left by centuries of palms before yours. Each one belonged to someone who braved the same seas, felt the same cold, and found shelter in this living thing of oak and tar. When you close your eyes, you hear the whisper of the hull against the waves, gentle and patient, like breath through an old flute. The ship speaks in its own language, promising to carry you a little farther before morning. You believe it. The night passes in restless silence. The sea grows gentle, and the air stills, so still that every breath seems to echo. You find yourself listening to the smallest sounds, the drip of water from the sail, the whisper of a rope shifting against wood. Above you, the stars turn slowly. Sleep here is not deep. It comes and goes like the tide. The Vikings had no beds on their ships, no soft blankets, no shelter from the wind. They slept where they sat, wrapped in wool cloaks, pressed between oars, cargo, and companions. When exhaustion arrived, they simply closed their eyes and let the rocking of the waves carry them into dreams. You try the same, feeling the rhythm through your bones, half comfort, half threat. Evidence from preserved shipwrecks shows that some longships had small raised decks or covered spaces near the stern where leaders might rest, but most of the crew slept openly. Animal hides, cloaks, and straw mats formed their only bedding. The line between waking and sleeping blurred, just as the line between safety and danger did. According to an old seafarer's tale, sailors sometimes slept in turns of 2 hours, their dreams timed to the rhythm of rowing. The ship itself set their schedule. You can imagine it, the sound of breathing mingled with the splash of oars, a lullaby made from labor. Researchers still debate how they managed to stay dry during such nights. Some suggest they used tarred leather sheets to shield themselves from spray. Others believe they accepted dampness as unavoidable and relied on body heat and wool to dry what the sea soaked. Whatever the truth, it must have taken a mind as steady as iron to sleep in such cold. You watch a man settle beside you, wrapping his cloak around his head. His face disappears completely, only his beard visible beneath the fabric. Another shifts closer, their shoulders touching. There is no embarrassment, no hesitation. Shared warmth is survival. Privacy has no place here. Archaeological findings from Viking graves show that people were often buried with blankets or cloaks of thick wool, suggesting that even in death, warmth was sacred. To them, covering the body meant protection, a final kindness against the eternal cold. You think of that as you pull your own cloak tighter. A peculiar custom mentioned in one saga tells of sailors placing small stones warmed by fire beneath their cloaks before sleeping. The stones cooled quickly, but the ritual mattered more than the effect. It was a gesture of defiance against the cold, a promise of mourning. The air smells faintly of smoke and salt. Somewhere, a low voice hums a song too soft to recognize. The melody drifts across the deck, weaving between the sleeping forms. It is both haunting and soothing. You close your eyes, feeling it vibrate inside your chest. There is uncertainty among historians about what dreams the Vikings valued. Some texts describe dreams as messages from gods or ancestors. Others treat them as simple imagination. Out here, with only stars and waves for company, you suspect they believed in both. A dream might be guidance, or it might be a test. You drift between wakefulness and sleep. The wood beneath you is cold, but the warmth of nearby bodies seeps through. Breath mingles and the air fogs softly with each exhale. You feel the pulse of the ship, steady and calm, as though it is breathing with you. Someone shifts, muttering in their sleep. Another coughs. The sound feels enormous in the stillness. Then silence again, the kind that presses on your ears until you hear your own heartbeat. You imagine the thousands of nights like this that once unfolded across the northern seas, each one a quiet endurance test against exhaustion and frost. Historical documents mention that some Viking ships carried furs from bears or reindeer, traded from the north. These hides offered luxury warmth, reserved for captains or seasoned sailors. You picture the thick pelts, heavy with oil, smelling of wilderness and strength. Touching one must have felt like resting against the memory of the land. As you try to sleep, you discover a rhythm. Inhale the salt air, exhale the tension. The body learns the ship's movements, predicting each rise and fall. Your mind follows the pattern until thought itself fades into motion. You are no longer a guest here. You are part of the long, slow breathing of the voyage. A cold droplet lands on your cheek. You open your eyes and see frost forming on the railing, shimmering in the faint starlight. The sea around you glows faintly green, lit by unseen life beneath the surface. Bioluminescent plankton trail along the hull like drifting stars. You realize that even in the darkest night, the world offers light if you are still enough to see it. Some researchers believe sailors saw these glowing waters as omens of good fortune, signs that the gods were near. Others think they simply admired them for beauty's sake. Either way, the sight is hypnotic. You watch the lights flicker until your eyes close again. When dawn finally arrives, you are stiff, cold, but alive. The first rays of sunlight cut across the deck, turning frost to glitter. The sleepers stir, stretch, and smile faintly. For another day, they have endured. You realize that sleep itself, however brief or uncomfortable, is an act of faith, the belief that morning will come and the sea will still hold them. You stand, your cloak heavy with dew, and look at the horizon. The ship creaks, the waves whisper, and a pale sun begins to rise. The cold remains, but so does the warmth within you, born of trust, fatigue, and the steady hum of survival. The morning sky burns white, the kind of brightness that feels colder than shadow. You rise slowly, every joint stiff, your breath a thin cloud before you. Around you the crew moves with practiced quiet. Someone coughs, another spits salt into the sea, and the day begins. Life here has no pause, only rhythm. Yet when something goes wrong with the body, rhythm turns fragile. Archaeological finds from settlements in Scandinavia show traces of herbal medicines stored in clay pots and animal horns. These remnants tell you that even in the harshest conditions, the Vikings carried knowledge of healing. They were not merely warriors, but careful observers of the natural world. According to old sagas and fragments of medical texts, sea voyagers brought with them bundles of dried herbs such as yarrow, angelica, and juniper. Yarrow helped close wounds, angelica fought infection, and juniper soothed aching joints. You can imagine those small bundles tied with string, their scents mingling with salt and smoke. There is disagreement among experts about how much of this medicine was based on experience and how much on faith. Some think Viking healers truly understood the plant's effects. Others believe ritual and superstition filled the gaps that science could not. Perhaps both are true, for here, on the shifting sea, every cure requires hope as much as skill. A sailor beside you winces, his hands red and cracked from cold. Another woman takes a small jar from her belt and opens it. Inside lies a paste the color of honey. She dabs it on his skin. The smell is sharp and earthy, a mix of fat, ash, and crushed herbs. Boar fat keeps the frost out, she explains. You rub a little on your own fingers, and it stings before warming. Records from Iceland describe similar salves made from animal fat mixed with moss and resin. The fat sealed wounds and kept infection away, while the moss provided mild antiseptic power. The Vikings knew that healing was not luxury, it was strategy. A sick or injured sailor could mean disaster for the crew. One unusual practice mentioned in an early Norse poem describes placing cold stones on bruises to draw out the fire of pain. You smile at the thought of using ice to heal in a world already frozen. But the logic makes sense. Cold numbs, preserves, steadies. They turned the sea's cruelty into medicine. Researchers still discuss how they treated deeper injuries. Some accounts speak of cauterizing wounds with heated iron, others of covering them with clean wool soaked in urine, which contains natural ammonia. It sounds unpleasant, but necessity has no room for disgust. Every drop of knowledge came from generations who learned through trial, error, and endurance. As the day grows brighter, you see the crew sharing what little comfort they have. One man massages his arms to keep blood moving. Another rinses a small cut in seawater. The salt stings, but he barely reacts. These people understand that pain is part of staying alive, a language their bodies speak fluently. You recall that in Norse mythology, even the gods carried scars. Odin sacrificed an eye for wisdom. Tyr lost his hand to bind the wolf Fenrir. Strength was never perfection. It was the ability to keep moving while broken. You feel that truth settle deep inside you as the ship rocks beneath your feet. A strange memory comes to you from earlier stories. Sailors chewing pieces of birch bark to relieve toothaches. Birch contains natural oils with antiseptic properties. The Vikings did not know the chemistry, but they knew relief when they felt it. They observed, remembered, and taught their children. The smell of burning fat drifts from a small brazier. Someone is warming a pot of water mixed with herbs, creating steam that softens the air. The crew breathe it in, eyes closed, as though it is a blessing. You join them, and the warmth touches your face, melting the thin frost on your lashes. For a moment, it feels like spring has crept aboard. No one fully agrees on how they handled serious illness during long voyages. Some sources suggest the sick were left at nearby settlements when possible. Others imply that if death came at sea, the body was committed to the waves, wrapped in cloth and prayers. The ocean received them as it had given life. You try to imagine that moment, the silence as the body slides into the water, the brief shimmer of fabric before it vanishes. The Vikings saw no separation between land and sea, life and death. Everything returned to the same cycle. As afternoon turns to dusk, a faint light glows on the horizon. The crew relaxes slightly. Someone laughs, a quiet sound that cuts through the monotony of waves. Healing is not only herbs and bandages, you realize. It is laughter, shared endurance, the steady pulse of companionship. The woman who treated the sailor earlier now hums a tune as she packs her small pouch. You catch the scent of juniper again, sharp and clean. She glances up, smiles, and says, "The sea heals too, if it does not kill." Her tone is gentle, almost playful, but her eyes hold years of truth. Night falls slowly. You sit near the brazier, feeling the last of its heat against your palms. Around you, the crew grows quiet, each person lost in thought. The air is thick with salt and smoke, and somewhere deep inside, you feel a calm acceptance settle. The Vikings understood that survival required more than courage. It demanded care, knowledge, and faith that every wound, whether of flesh or spirit, could be mended. You watch the last spark fade into darkness, the sea sigh beneath the hull, and you think that perhaps healing is not about erasing pain, but about learning to carry it forward into the next dawn. By morning, the sea breathes a little softer. The ice that clung to the edges of the ship has begun to melt, dripping into small puddles that glisten in the pale light. You smell salt and fur mixed with the faint musk of animals. When you look toward the bow, you finally see the source of that warmth that feels almost alive. The Vikings were never truly alone on their journeys. Archaeological evidence from burials and coastal excavations shows that dogs, hawks, and sometimes even livestock accompanied Norse voyagers. They were companions, guards, and living supplies of warmth. You notice a dog curled against a sailor's feet, its coat thick and golden under the morning sunday. The man scratches its ear absently, both of them content. According to an account preserved in early Norse poetry, dogs were valued not only for protection but for their spirit. A loyal hound on deck was thought to calm the sea. You smile at the superstition. Yet when the dog lifts its head and gazes toward the horizon, you almost believe it. There is disagreement among historians about how many animals traveled on long voyages. Some think livestock was kept for milk and meat on shorter trips, while others argue that only essential animals such as dogs or trained birds made the crossing. The truth, as always, may lie between. You can easily imagine a ship alive with sound, dogs barking, sheep bleating, wings rustling in the wind. The hawks were symbols of status and skill. A falcon perched on a captain's wrist marked him as both noble and disciplined. The birds were trained to hunt small prey during coastal stops, providing fresh meat when supplies grew thin. You picture the sudden burst of feathers against grey sky, a streak of life amid all this cold. One peculiar detail mentioned in a saga tells of sailors feeding dogs pieces of dried fish mixed with snow to keep them hydrated. The image makes you chuckle softly. Even the animals shared in the strange meals of survival. A faint noise interrupts your thoughts, a low groan from below deck. You climb down the short ladder and find two goats tied near the cargo. Their breath rises like steam, and their small bodies radiate surprising heat. The air is warmer here, thick with life. You realize how clever this is. In winter, even animal presence becomes insulation. Historical records note that Vikings often brought goats or sheep on voyages not only for milk but for their warmth. Their bodies turned the lower deck into a living furnace. In return, the crew shared scraps and care. It was a quiet partnership of endurance. You sit near the animals and listen to their soft bleats. The sound is rhythmic, soothing. The ship creaks above, and for a moment it feels like you are inside the chest of some enormous creature. All heartbeats and breath, you reach out to touch a goat's coarse fur. It is rough but alive, a reminder that warmth can come from simple, wordless company. According to a curious note in a medieval travel tale, sailors sometimes used animal hair to line gloves and boots, combining comfort and practicality. It makes sense now. Touching the thick undercoat, every part of nature found its purpose aboard a Viking ship. Researchers continue to discuss whether cats sailed alongside their human companions. Some findings suggest they did, not just for affection but for pest control. Grains stored for trading or eating attracted rats, and cats ensured it stayed safe. You glance toward a barrel and half expect to see glowing eyes watching from the shadows. The presence of animals changed more than the temperature. It softened the atmosphere. A dog's bark, a goat's sigh, even a hawk's cry gave sound to silence. The crew spoke to them as they would to old friends. In a world ruled by frost and uncertainty, these creatures reminded them of home and land, of the warmth of a hearth. A sailor named Leif kneels to feed the dog by his side. "He saved me once," he says quietly. You ask how, and he tells you the story of a storm so fierce it tore the sail in half. The dog had barked moments before the first wave hit, giving them time to grab the ropes. Whether luck or instinct, it became legend. It strikes you how the Vikings' relationship with animals mirrors their relationship with the sea. Both are unpredictable, powerful, and deeply respected. They did not dominate these companions. They cooperated. You see it in every gesture, every touch between human and beast. An ancient charm recorded in Norse folklore calls on the spirits of wolves and bears to lend courage. Perhaps by sailing with dogs and hawks, they believed they carried fragments of those wild strengths with them. The connection between human and animal was not sentimental but spiritual, woven into the rhythm of life and survival. As the day fades, you hear laughter as the dog tumbles across the deck, chasing a piece of rope. Even the toughest warriors smile, their faces softening in the golden light. You realize that joy is also warmth, that companionship, human or animal, keeps despair at bay. When night returns, you lie near the lower deck again, listening to the quiet breathing of both people and animals. The air feels different here, heavy with comfort rather than cold. The goats shift in their sleep, The dog sighs, and the ship hums softly. You close your eyes, imagining the long centuries of voyages where such sounds filled the darkness. The Vikings may have faced an unending winter, but they never truly sailed alone. Warmth, it seems, was always alive among them, beating in fur and feather, shared breath, and loyal hearts. The night deepens until the horizon disappears, and the sea becomes a single moving mirror of dark steel. The wind calms for once, leaving the ship in eerie stillness. You hear every sound now: the gentle lap of water, the soft thud of ropes shifting, the creak of wood that seems to sigh with age. Somewhere, a voice begins to hum. Music has a way of filling the cold, and for the Vikings, sound was as essential as food or fire. It gave rhythm to rowing, courage to fear, and memory to silence. You listen as one sailor takes up a small instrument, a lyre with strings of animal gut. The notes rise fragile at first, then grow confident, threading through the air like smoke from a hidden fire. Archaeological findings of musical instruments from places like Birka and Hedeby confirm that Vikings carried lyres, flutes, and horns. These were not merely for celebration. They were tools of focus, instruments that shaped the mood of the crew. A melody could remind them of home or keep their hands steady in darkness. According to an old poem found in the Codex Regius, sailors believed that sound itself held power. The right song could call favorable winds or keep sea spirits asleep. You think of that now as the tune drifts across the waves, half prayer, half lullaby. There is disagreement among scholars about whether the music was improvised or part of an oral tradition memorized by generations. Some argue each crew created their own songs as the voyage unfolded. Others believe certain melodies were sacred, repeated exactly as ancestors had sung them. Either way, what matters is the act of singing itself, the defiance of sound against silence. The man playing the lyre closes his eyes, swaying slightly. Around him, the others begin to join in, their voices rough and low. They chant more than they sing, each tone vibrating like the heartbeat of the ship. You feel it through the planks beneath you, through the soles of your feet, through the pulse in your chest. Records from medieval travelers mention how Viking songs carried across the sea long before their ships appeared. Imagine standing on a foreign coast and hearing that haunting music on the wind, a sound that was neither threat nor welcome, only something larger than either. An unusual belief mentioned in northern folklore says that the sea could mimic human voices. Sailors claimed to hear the echoes of their own songs in the crash of waves, as if the ocean answered them. Scientists today would call it acoustics, but to those who sailed these waters, it was a reminder that the sea listened. As the music continues, you notice how the cold feels softer. Breath moves in rhythm with the melody, and your body begins to sway unconsciously. It is a kind of shared trance. The Vikings may not have had warmth in abundance, but they created harmony instead, and harmony can heat the soul. A sailor tells you quietly that some melodies are meant for the living, others for the dead. He speaks of funeral chants sung when comrades were lost at sea. The sound was said to guide their spirits safely to the halls of Valhalla. You can almost imagine that now, voices drifting upward into the night, finding paths among the stars. Researchers point out that collective singing had practical uses too. It regulated the pace of rowing and eased the exhaustion of long work. Each verse became a unit of time, every chorus a reminder that no one rowed alone. When the oars rose and fell together, the ship itself became an instrument. The air grows colder, and the song shifts. Now it sounds older, more sorrowful. The melody turns inward, like a memory surfacing. You realize that in their music, the Vikings kept their history alive. Each note carried stories of ancestors, lovers, battles, and storms long past. It was their way of making time move in circles rather than lines. A curious note from a 13th century chronicler describes Viking singers using the sea's rhythm to find pitch. They listened to the crash of waves and matched it, as though harmonizing with the world itself. The thought makes you smile. You try humming quietly, letting your voice blend with the ship's groan, the wind's whisper, and the sigh of water. For a moment, you are part of the choir. When the song finally fades, silence follows like a soft blanket. The crew exhales together, the spell broken but the warmth lingering. Even the sea seems calmer, its surface rippling with reflected starlight. You can still feel the vibration of the melody in your chest, a quiet echo that refuses to die. No one speaks for a while. Then the helmsman chuckles. "The sea liked that one," he says. You look around and see small smiles, tired but content. In this fragile world of frost and waves, laughter and music are the oldest forms of heat. As you lie back, the deck cold against your back, you replay the song in your mind. The notes drift between memory and imagination until they become the rhythm of your heartbeat. The Vikings understood something simple and eternal. Warmth begins where voices meet. Even now, centuries later, the sea keeps that echo, humming softly beneath the stars. Morning breaks with a thin pink glow on the horizon. The sea looks less like a threat now, and more like a mirror that hides its secrets. You stand among the crew as they prepare the sail, their movements brisk but calm. Today there is talk not of storms or gods, but of trade and treasure. The thought of gold glitters even in the grey light. Evidence from ship burials shows that many Viking voyages were not only raids but commercial expeditions. They traded furs, walrus ivory, amber, and iron for silk, spices, and silver coins that came from lands far warmer than these. The wealth they sought was as much a reason for risking the freezing sea as honor or adventure. According to an account written by an Arab traveller who met Norse traders along the Volga River, these northern men were both fierce and meticulous in business. They washed daily, kept their weapons gleaming, and haggled with relentless patience. You imagine them doing the same aboard this ship, weighing their chances with every gust of wind. Experts still debate whether raiding or trading brought them more prosperity. Some argue that raids gave them the fame that shaped their legend, while commerce built the foundations of their real power. Watching the crew now, you see both instincts at work, the hunger for survival and the hunger for abundance. A sailor named Eric sharpens a knife on a whetstone. Its edge glints like a flash of ice. Silver keeps the frost away, he jokes, though his tone hides something deeper. For men who spent months at sea, wealth meant more than greed. It meant security for their families, food through long winters, and status among their kin. Archaeological finds in Scandinavia reveal that coins from as far as Baghdad and Constantinople ended up buried in Viking soil. Each piece tells of a journey across deserts, rivers, and frozen seas. You turn one over in your imagination and feel the heat of distant markets still clinging to its surface. A curious legend describes sailors warming their hands over piles of silver before dividing them, claiming that treasure held the warmth of the lands it came from. It sounds fanciful, yet as sunlight touches a handful of coins someone displays now, they do seem to glow faintly. The crew gather to admire them, their faces soft with pride. The Vikings did not separate the practical from the sacred. Gold and silver were not only wealth, but symbols of divine favor. The sagas speak of Freya, god of fertility and abundance, whose blessings brought both harvest and trade. When the sea gave back riches, it was seen as proof that the gods approved. Records from monasteries raided in Britain mention how Norse warriors spared churches that offered food or ransom. Violence and negotiation walked hand in hand. You can sense that same duality here. Calloused hands that could row or strike, eyes that could measure risk like merchants. There is still uncertainty among historians about how Viking crews decided between raiding and trading when reaching foreign shores. Some sources suggest they judged by opportunity, others by mood or rumor. Perhaps the line between commerce and conquest was never fixed but shifted with the tide. You watch as the sailors count their goods: rolls of wool, polished bone, carved combs, and small bags of salt. Each item is simple yet precious, the kind of thing that could buy passage, friendship, or survival. They handle them with care, as if touching future promises. One man holds up a necklace of amber beads. The light catches it, and the beads glow like drops of frozen sunlight, made from the tears of the sea, he says, repeating an old saying. You take one in your hand and feel its smoothness, its faint warmth. It seems to hold both memory and hope. Travelers from far-off lands once described the Vikings as both terrifying and charming. They could arrive with axes or with gifts, depending on how the wind blew. That duality runs deep in their nature, a reminder that survival was not just about strength, but about adaptation. The ship itself is a marketplace now. Voices rise as they barter with one another for amusement. A knife traded for fur, a cloak exchanged for a carved comb. The laughter feels light, almost domestic. You realize that this too is warmth, the warmth of trust, of trade, of knowing one's worth in the eyes of others. An old sailor speaks of the great trading town of Hedeby, where goods from the east met treasures from the west. You could smell the world there, he says with a wistful smile. You imagine the scent, tar, honey, spices and sweat all mingling in the cold air. By evening the talk of silver fades and the sea takes over again. The sail fills with wind and the ship begins to move faster. You stand near the railing and think of the riches they chase. Gold may glitter, but it is the act of seeking it that keeps them alive, gives them purpose, and warms them through endless winter. The sun dips low, turning the water to bronze. You can almost see the reflections of distant cities shimmering on the waves, places these sailors dream of reaching. The air grows colder again, but your thoughts are filled with warmth that comes not from fire or fur, but from human ambition, the desire to create and to connect across impossible distances. The longship surges forward, carrying the hopes of every man and woman aboard. Behind them lies frost. Ahead, perhaps, lies fortune. Either way, the journey itself is the treasure, and tonight the sea glows with the promise of it. By the next sunrise, the sea lies quiet as if resting. The wind moves softly across the deck, stirring the ropes and the sleeping cloaks. You smell salt, wood, and something faintly sweet from the tar that seals the planks. The men and women aboard stir slowly, stretching, rubbing their eyes, their thoughts already drifting toward home. For every voyage that left the northern shores, there were fires still burning in the longhouses far behind. The women who stayed behind tended those fires, guarded them through the cold months, and waited for sails to return over the horizon. You picture them now, faces lit by the glow of the hearth, listening to the wind against the roof beams and wondering where their loved ones are drifting. Archaeological studies of settlements in Norway and Iceland reveal that women oversaw farms and estates while the men were at sea. They managed livestock, brewed ale, kept stores of grain, and decided which fields to plant. Their strength at home balanced the dangers of the sea. Without them, no voyage could have begun, and no sailor would have had a reason to return. According to an Icelandic saga, a woman could divorce her husband by declaring it before witnesses and walking out the door of the longhouse. That image stays with you. The same fire that warmed the home also gave power. These women were not silent figures waiting in shadows. They were pillars of survival. Experts still discuss how deeply women influenced the seafaring life. Some argue that their roles ended on land, while others point to graves containing weapons and ship fragments, suggesting that some may have joined the voyages themselves. The evidence is scattered, but you can feel their presence in every story, every longing glance toward home. You imagine the longhouses themselves, great wooden halls filled with smoke and light, the air thick with the scent of peat fires and roasted meat. Woolen tapestries cover the walls, telling stories in color. Children sleep near the hearth while their mothers spin thread, their hands moving with steady rhythm. Outside, snow falls softly against the roof. Inside, time waits. One curious legend tells of women who placed carved wooden figures of their husbands near the fire, feeding them scraps of food so that the sea would not starve them. It sounds like superstition, yet it is full of love disguised as ritual. Even from afar they shared warmth through imagination. Historical records mention that when sailors returned, feasts lit the longhouses for days. Meat roasted over open flames, horns of mead passed from hand to hand, and songs rose high enough to shake the rafters. In those moments, every frozen night at sea melted into joy. You can almost hear the laughter now, carried faintly across centuries. There is uncertainty among scholars about how family inheritance worked when voyages ended in tragedy. Some evidence suggests that women claimed full rights to their homes and farms, becoming leaders of small communities. Others believe male relatives took charge. But no matter the legal lines, the women kept the hearth burning, the symbol of continuity that bound the Viking world together. The crew speaks often of home now. One man describes his wife's cooking, another recalls the sound of his child's laughter. Their voices soften, and you feel the temperature change inside them. Hope warms more deeply than fire. A young sailor shows you a pendant carved in the shape of a bird. "She made this," he says quietly. "Said it would fly me back." The edges are worn smooth from his touch. You see that in every token, every prayer, the idea of home lives stronger than the fear of death. The sagas often begin and end beside a hearth. Adventures are born from comfort, and they return to it in the end. Even now, you can feel that pull, the invisible thread tying every wandering heart to a place of warmth and waiting. According to travelers who visited Norse lands, the glow of longhouse fires could be seen from far across the fjords on winter nights. Those lights were more than household flames, they were beacons. A sailor lost at sea might imagine that glow guiding him home, a promise that the world had not forgotten him. You close your eyes and picture it clearly. The crackling fire, the smell of bread baking on stone, the hum of voices rising in gentle conversation. The woman who tends the fire glances toward the door every so often, not in worry, but in steady faith. She knows the sea will give back what it takes. As evening falls again, the ship rocks gently, and someone begins to hum a tune that sounds like a lullaby. You recognize its rhythm as one meant for children, passed from mother to son. The melody feels like home itself, stitched into memory by generations. You realize that these fires waiting on shore, tended by patient hands, are part of what kept the Vikings alive in the frozen dark. Their journeys were driven not only by ambition but by longing. The sea tested their bodies, but memory of home warmed their souls. The wind shifts slightly, and the sail catches it with a sigh. Ahead lies more ocean, but somewhere beyond it burns a hearth that never truly goes out. You can almost feel its heat across the miles of ice and salt, a gentle reminder that every voyage is, at its heart, a journey toward belonging. The morning begins with laughter. You wake to the sound of dice clattering on wood, followed by a chorus of groans and cheers. The air smells of sea salt and smoke from the small brazier near the mast. For the first time in days, the mood aboard feels light. The cold still clings to everything, but the crew's spirits seem to burn brighter than any fire. Archaeological evidence from Viking settlements has revealed gaming pieces carved from bone, amber, and antler. These were more than toys. They were symbols of leisure and connection. You watch now as a group huddles around a small board scratched into the deck. The players lean close, breath fogging, their eyes sharp with focus. According to one old saga, sailors passed the time by playing Linefattical, a board game of kings and attackers. It taught strategy, patience, and calm under pressure. The game mirrors their world perfectly. One player guarding the center, surrounded by others closing in from all sides, each move a decision between risk and safety. You realize how much this reflects their life at sea. Experts still debate the exact rules of the game. The pieces found in graves differ from one region to another, suggesting many versions existed. Some scholars think it symbolized war. Others say it was a form of storytelling. Watching the crew now, you suspect it is simply about keeping the mind awake when the world turns white and still. One sailor rolls a pair of dice carved from walrus bone. The click of them is crisp and satisfying. He laughs as he loses, shrugs, and takes a swig from a leather flask. It is not the loss that matters, but the noise, the movement, the proof that life continues even when the sea freezes around them. Written accounts from foreign visitors describe how Norsemen carried mead and ale on their ships whenever possible. Fermented honey and barley turned into warmth that glowed from the inside out. You can smell it now, sweet and heavy in the air. They pass the flask around, and when it reaches you, the liquid burns your throat before settling into comfort. A curious mention in the sagas speaks of sailors reciting riddles and poems to outwit one another during long nights. Losers had to row extra hours or surrender their portion of food. You smile at the thought. Even in hardship, they found ways to turn suffering into play. There is uncertainty among historians about how common drinking at sea truly was. Some argue that alcohol was rare and precious, others that small amounts were essential for morale. Judging by the cheer around you now, you believe the latter. Every sip is a rebellion against the cold, a toast to endurance. Music joins the laughter. Someone strikes a rhythm against the side of the hull, and another claps along. Voices rise in playful songs that echo across the water. The lyrics are rough and mischievous, full of teasing about who snores loudest or who lost a game to a lucky throw. The laughter rolls like waves. Researchers note that humor was a central part of Viking resilience. In their culture, wit was as admired as courage. A sharp tongue could win arguments as surely as a sharp blade could win battles. You see that truth now in the sparkle of their eyes, in jokes shouted through chattering teeth. One sailor tries to balance a knife upright on a rolling barrel. The others cheer him on. When it falls, they groan dramatically, and someone starts singing a mock funeral tune. The deck fills with laughter so loud it shakes the rigging. For a moment, even the sea seems to pause and listen. Archaeological digs in Greenland have uncovered fragments of musical instruments and carved game boards found side by side. The discovery suggests that play and art traveled with them everywhere. They carried joy as carefully as they carried weapons. As daylight fades, the games slow, replaced by quiet conversation. Someone tells a story about a ghost ship that appears only to those who are already doomed. Another claims to have seen it once, glowing green on a foggy night. The crew listens, half skeptical, half enthralled. Storytelling and fear mingle like wind and water. A strange detail recorded in folklore says that laughter kept spirits away. Sailors would make noise after dark to stop ghosts from boarding. You look around now and realize that perhaps this is what they are doing instinctively, keeping darkness at a distance through joy. The flask passes again, lighter now. The crew's cheeks glow red, eyes bright, shoulders relaxed. For once, the sea feels almost kind. You sense that this is what survival really means here, not simply resisting the cold but creating moments where life feels bigger than it. The night deepens. The stars are sharp and countless, scattered like salt across a black table. The laughter fades into murmurs, then into humming. Someone snores softly, another whispers a prayer. The ship rocks them all like a cradle, and you feel warmth not from fire or drink, but from the quiet company of people who know how to find joy at the edge of the world. The Vikings endured because they refused to let the cold define them. They played, sang, and laughed until even the wind seemed to smile. You realize that in the sound of their laughter, there is the truest kind of heat, the kind that no storm can ever take away. The laughter fades with the dawn. What follows is silence so sharp it feels like a blade drawn across the sky. The sea turns black again, rolling in heavy swells that strike the ship with deep, deliberate rhythm. You wake to the sound of ropes groaning and feel the cold return like a predator that had only been pretending to sleep. Storms are part of the sea's language, and today it speaks loudly. The wind picks up first, pulling at the sail until it snaps taut. Spray flies in bursts, stinging your face, turning breath into mist. The crew move fast, securing the ropes, lowering the mast, tying down barrels. Every hand knows its task. Panic wastes energy, and out here, energy is life. Archaeological studies of shipwrecks along the Norwegian coast reveal how often these voyages ended in disaster. Fragments of hulls, broken oars, and bones tell stories of storms that showed no mercy. Each wreck is a reminder that courage alone was never enough. According to an entry in an Icelandic chronicle, entire fleets sometimes vanished during winter crossings. The sea could rise without warning, swallowing ships before they could even turn toward land. You imagine the fear in that final moment. No horizon, no stars, only roaring darkness and the taste of salt in the mouth. There is disagreement among researchers about how much weather forecasting the Vikings truly understood. Some argue they could read subtle signs in cloud color or wave motion. Others think that even the best sailor could only trust instinct. What cannot be predicted must be endured. A sailor shouts something to the helmsman, his voice lost in the wind. The ship lurches sideways, and cold water rushes across the deck, soaking everything in its path. The shock steals your breath. Around you, faces remain steady, their focus absolute. You realize how discipline becomes its own kind of warmth, holding the crew together when the world around them breaks apart. Records from later Norse writings describe sailors rubbing snow on their faces during storms to stay awake. The freezing sting kept them alert. You see one man do it now, his eyes glassy with exhaustion but his movements sure. Another grips the side rail so tightly his knuckles bleed. The blood freezes almost instantly, a thin red crystal against the wood. A curious legend tells of sailors who claim to see a glowing woman walking across the water during violent seas. She was called Havfru, the sea's daughter, both protector and destroyer. Some swore she guided them home, others said she marked them for death. You search the waves, half expecting to see her. The storm has that kind of magic, where every flash of lightning feels like a living presence. Historians remain divided on whether the Vikings truly feared the sea or worshipped it. Some say they saw it as a god in its own right, beyond even Njord's reach. Others think they respected it simply as part of life, a force to be navigated, not resisted. You decide both are true. No one spends this much time in danger without learning reverence. A huge wave strikes. The ship tilts violently, throwing you against the railing. Cold water pours over you, biting through every layer of wool. The sound is deafening. Wind howling, wood cracking, voices shouting commands. Someone grabs your arm and pulls you upright. Their grip is fierce but steady. Even in chaos, they find strength in one another. The cold becomes an ache that seeps into bone. You feel it crawl up your fingers, into your arms, toward your chest. The Vikings called this creeping death, cold fire, and once it reached the heart, no prayer could turn it back. To fight it, they move constantly, stamping their feet, shouting to stay awake. Motion means heat, stillness means surrender. Historical accounts of ship burials often show personal items placed beside the dead combs, knives, drinking horns. Each object spoke of life continuing beyond the body. You think about that now as the waves pound harder. To die at sea was not shameful. It was an extension of existence. The ocean was both grave and gate. Someone begins to chant above the wind, words you cannot understand but recognize as a prayer. The others join, their voices rising and falling in unison. The rhythm gives the storm shape, turns fear into movement. The ship stops feeling like a victim and becomes part of the storm's pulse. A strange report from a later monk describes Norse sailors laughing during tempests, mocking the thunder as if daring the gods to do worse. Watching these faces, now eyes narrow, mouths set in grim smiles, you see truth in it. Laughter, even defiant, becomes armor. Hours pass. The storm begins to lose its strength. The waves shrink from mountains to hills. The wind softens to a hiss. The crew slump where they stand, breathing hard. Frost coats their hair and beards, yet their eyes glow with relief. One man whispers thanks to the sea, another kisses the wet wood beneath his hand. Survival here feels like a miracle too ordinary to name. Researchers have suggested that surviving such ordeals shaped the Vikings' sense of destiny. They believed those who lived through the sea's wrath were chosen by fate, blessed by unseen hands. You understand why. The world feels newly sharpened, every heartbeat louder, every breath a gift. The sun breaks through at last, weak and pale, but enough to scatter diamonds of light across the wet deck. You look around and see the crew smiling in silence. No one cheers. They simply exist, alive in the quiet aftermath. The sea has tested them, and for now, released them. You wrap your cloak tighter, shivering. The cold remains, but inside it grows a different warmth, the kind born of surviving something that could have ended you. The ship moves onward, slower now, cutting through calmer water. The storm fades behind, leaving only memory and a deep, echoing respect. When the storm finally releases its hold, the sea seems strangely tender. The air smells clean, like snow just melted. The crew moves slowly, their bodies heavy with fatigue, but their faces lit by the quiet satisfaction of survival. You lean against the railing, feeling the ship glide on a surface that now ripples gently, the waves whispering rather than roaring. After so many days of grey and wind, the first sign of land feels unreal. It begins as a faint shadow at the edge of vision, then grows clearer, a dark line cutting across the pale horizon. Someone points, and for a moment there is only silence, followed by a cheer that bursts from every throat. Land. The word itself feels like warmth. Archaeological evidence from Norse settlements on Greenland, Iceland, and the British Isles shows how often these sailors found themselves stepping onto unfamiliar shores. Each landfall carried both relief and risk. To reach land alive meant triumph, but it also meant the challenge of survival beginning anew. According to an Icelandic saga, sailors would sometimes kneel and kiss the ground upon arrival, thanking the gods for allowing their feet to feel solid earth again. You imagine doing the same, pressing your lips to damp soil that smells of moss and salt. The scent of land after weeks of sea is overwhelming, rich and alive. Experts still debate the exact routes of Viking expansion across the North Atlantic. Some think they sailed purposefully toward new settlements, while others believe storms carried them farther than they planned. Whichever is true, each new coastline marked both an ending and a beginning. The ship drifts closer. You can see seabirds circling, their cries sharp and familiar. The crew start to prepare. Ropes coiled, sail lowered, tools checked. Even after such hardship, they move with quiet precision. Survival has become habit, not hope. As the hull scrapes against shallow water, the sound echoes through the wood. The sailors drop anchor and lower a plank to shore. The first to step onto land does not speak. He simply kneels, scooping up a handful of wet sand and letting it fall slowly through his fingers. The gesture needs no explanation. Historical texts mention that Vikings carried small bags of their homeland's soil with them on voyages. When they landed on foreign shores, they sprinkled it beneath their feet before stepping off the ship. It was a way of taking a piece of home with them wherever they went, of claiming safety in the unfamiliar. You wonder if someone aboard has done the same now, quietly, without drawing attention. A curious local tale from Scotland tells of settlers who burned seaweed upon arrival to drive out evil spirits of the deep. The smell of it lingers in your mind as you watch the crew light a small fire near the shore. The smoke curls upward, mingling with the damp air, carrying both superstition and relief. Researchers remain divided on whether the Vikings saw each new land as permanent refuge or temporary camp. Some stayed for generations, building farms and families. Others left again as soon as the weather shifted, restless as the tides. The will to move forward seems woven into their bones. The crew unloads what little remains of their supplies: barrels of dried fish, bundles of wool, tools wrapped in leather. The ground beneath your boots feels unsteady after so long at sea, and the air feels thick, heavy with scents you had almost forgotten. Grass, soil, pine. It is as if the land itself exhales around you, welcoming you home. A sailor kneels beside a small stream and cups water in his hands. He drinks, then laughs aloud, water spilling down his chin. The others follow, drinking greedily, their faces softening with something close to reverence. After so many weeks of salt, fresh water tastes like miracle. According to a local chronicle found centuries later, early Norse settlers would mark their landings with runes carved into stone. These carvings spoke of safe passage, of gratitude to the gods, and of remembrance for those who did not make it ashore. You find a flat rock nearby and see faint etchings on its surface. The grooves are shallow but deliberate, the marks of human hands greeting the earth. The fire on the shore grows brighter as night falls. The crew gather around it, drying their clothes, laughing softly. Someone roasts strips of meat over the flames, and the smell fills the air, rich and smoky. The warmth feels deeper than before, not just from the fire, but from being surrounded by stillness that does not move beneath your feet. No one speaks of the storm now. They speak instead of what lies ahead, whether this place will hold enough game, whether the soil will grow crops, whether the gods have guided them to a good shore. Their questions rise like sparks and vanish into the wind. The sea murmurs behind you, softer now, almost affectionate. You turn and watch it for a while, realizing how strange it feels to see it as something separate again rather than the ground beneath your life. You know that for these sailors, land is not escape from the sea, but a brief pause in its endless rhythm. You sit near the fire, watching shadows dance across the sand. The faces around you are tired, but peaceful. They have earned this warmth, every flicker of it. Tomorrow they will build shelters, explore the hills, perhaps sail onward again. But tonight, they belong to the fire and the soil and to each other. The wind cools as the stars return. You lie back, feeling the solid ground press against your body. For the first time in weeks, the world does not sway. You breathe deeply, tasting earth instead of salt, and understand why every voyage, no matter how perilous, was worth it. Landfall is not just survival, it is rebirth. The days that follow pass in a blur of sunlight, frost, and the sweet shock of stillness. The crew moves across the shore like people relearning how to live on solid ground. They gather driftwood, hunt for fresh water, mend their torn cloaks. The sound of hammering replaces the rhythm of oars, and laughter returns in small bursts. You can feel something changing in the air. Archaeological discoveries across Scandinavia and the North Atlantic show how quickly the Vikings adapted to new environments. Wherever they landed, they built with what they found. Turf, stone, and timber became homes. Even in Greenland's frozen soil, they carved warmth out of the earth. The spirit of survival that had carried them across the sea transformed into settlement. According to records from medieval chroniclers, some Vikings who reached distant shores chose never to sail again. They became farmers and traders, planting grain where none had grown before, raising sheep in valleys that had never known fences. They turned isolation into community and harshness into habit. Scholars still debate what drove their expansion so far from home. Some claim hunger for land and wealth. Others say it was curiosity, the need to push against the edge of the world. Looking at these people now, you sense it was both. Exploration was their way of staying alive in spirit as much as in body. A sailor named Hilda kneels near the fire, carving runes into a piece of driftwood. When you ask what she writes, she smiles faintly. Names, she says. So the land will remember us. You watch her knife trace the symbols, each stroke precise and patient. The Vikings believed that to carve a name was to plant it in time. Archaeological evidence of these rune carvings still dots the northern world. Some mark graves, others record trade, and a few simply bear phrases like, "Eric was here." They are fragments of presence, the earliest graffiti of endurance. Even the cold could not erase them. A curious story told in later Icelandic lore speaks of settlers leaving a piece of bread or meat on a new land as an offering to unseen spirits. If animals touched it by morning, the place was safe. If not, they moved on. You picture that small act now, faith expressed through hunger and patience. Experts remain divided on how much of Viking resilience was built on faith versus practicality. Their habits seem half spiritual, half scientific. They observed, experimented, adapted, and when something worked, it became tradition. In their world, even the smallest ritual might be the difference between life and death. The new camp grows stronger each day. Simple shelters rise, stitched from branches and hides. The sound of laughter and tools blends with the cry of gulls. It feels like the beginning of something larger. You realize that warmth is no longer just survival here, it is creation. Records from later settlers describe how Viking houses were designed to trap heat. The walls were lined with turf, the hearth placed in the center, smoke venting through a narrow hole in the roof. Everyone slept close together on benches covered with fur. The home became both furnace and refuge. You watch them build such a hearth now. They light it carefully, feeding it with dried moss and driftwood until the first flames catch. The fire crackles, its glow reflecting in every face. There is a kind of awe in their silence as they stare at it, as though the light were sacred. After weeks of cold, this is more than comfort, it is renewal. One of the younger sailors tells you quietly that in his village, they believed every hearth had its own spirit, called the Husfreyja, who protected the household. Offerings of bread or milk were made to her at the start of each winter. He breaks a small piece of dried fish and tosses it into the flames. So she finds us here too, he says. Researchers suggest that this reverence for fire carried deep cultural meaning. It symbolized life itself, a living link between ancestors and the living. To keep the flame burning was to honor every soul who had once survived the same darkness. Night settles slowly over the new settlement. The fire glows inside a half-built hut, throwing golden light through cracks in the walls. The air outside is cold enough to sting, but inside it feels soft and alive. Someone plays a low tune on a bone flute. The sound mixes with the crackle of fire until it feels like the earth itself is breathing. A strange comfort fills you as you sit there. You realize that the Vikings' strength was not only their courage at sea, but their ability to build warmth wherever they landed. They carried the habits of survival with them, like invisible tools, songs, crafts, rituals, laughter, and turned each new land into home. Historians now speak of how these settlements shaped the modern North. The Norse way of life, born in frost, laid the foundation for communities that still endure across Iceland, Norway, and Greenland. The people here did not merely conquer the cold, they learned to live within it. As you step outside, the stars shine bright and close, and the sea hums softly in the distance. Behind you, the fire burns steady, the same ancient glow that lit 1,000 journeys before. The wind brushes your face, sharp but familiar, and you understand something profound. The cold is not an enemy to be defeated. It is part of the story, the background against which human endurance shines brightest. The Vikings have given the world that lesson. They showed that warmth is not given, it is made. Out of wood and will, out of laughter and fear, out of the unbreakable desire to keep living, even when the night lasts forever. You turn back toward the light of the hearth, glowing like a small sun in the frozen dark, and feel what they must have felt every time they built anew, the deep, quiet pride of those who refuse to be undone by the cold. The winter deepens. Frost paints the edges of the new huts in delicate lace, and the morning air bites like sharpened glass. Yet the camp no longer feels desperate. Smoke rises from the hearths, curling gently into the white sky. The sound of chopping wood mixes with laughter. The Vikings have found balance again, turning wilderness into routine. Archaeological evidence from settlements such as Lançon Meadows in Newfoundland shows traces of iron smelting, workshops, and domestic hearths. These remains prove that even on the edge of the known world, they carried civilization with them. The fire that once burned inside longships now glowed within homes, a steady answer to the endless cold. According to a local saga fragment, settlers would gather every evening to share tales of their homeland. The stories were both memory and magic, reminders that life continued beyond the horizon. You watch a group do that now, faces warm with firelight, eyes reflecting flames as they speak softly of places far away. There is still disagreement among scholars about how long such colonies lasted before fading. Some think they disappeared quickly under harsh winters. Others believe they survived for generations, their people blending into new cultures. What remains certain is that their spirit lingered, carried forward by those who remembered. A man named Torvald sits beside the fire, carving something from a piece of driftwood. When you ask, he smiles and says it is a small ship, a gift for his son back home. The gesture seems simple, yet it contains the weight of every voyage, leaving, surviving, returning in some form. You imagine that little carving placed on a shelf in a warm house, a silent promise that the sea did not win. Researchers studying Norse settlements have found evidence of imported goods, silk, spices, and bronze ornaments, showing that trade never stopped, even at the edge of the world. This persistence mirrors the very soul of their people. No horizon was too far if there was meaning beyond it. A curious folk tale recorded in the Faroe Islands centuries later tells of an old sailor who said the sea itself remembers kindness. He believed every act of compassion given on the water softened future storms. Whether or not he was right, you like the idea. Perhaps warmth spreads in ways unseen. The Vikings built their lives on that kind of quiet belief. Not blind faith, but trust born of experience. They had faced the cold, the hunger, the endless dark, and still managed to create beauty from endurance. Their homes were not only walls against the wind, but symbols of what humanity can do when it refuses to yield. As night gathers again, the sky clears to reveal a million stars. The northern lights shimmer faintly at the edge of vision, like green silk brushed across the heavens. The crew stand in silence, watching. Their faces glow with awe rather than fear. You understand why ancient sailors thought the lights were the spirits of fallen warriors, the ancestors still guiding them home. The fire crackles behind you. The air smells of pine and smoke, clean and sharp. The sounds of the sea drift from afar, no longer threatening but rhythmic, as though the waves themselves are whispering farewell. You feel both small and infinite, part of something that began long before you and will continue long after. Modern scientists now study how people adapt to extreme cold, finding that resilience is not only physical but emotional. The Vikings had already proven that 1,000 years ago. Their secret was never strength alone, but the ability to find warmth in community, in song, in faith, and in the smallest rituals of care. A woman throws another log onto the fire. Sparks rise, golden against the dark. Around her the others settle into quiet conversation, their voices low and steady. The scene feels timeless, faces illuminated by flame, eyes reflecting stories yet untold. You realize that this is what survival truly looks like, not a battle against nature, but a dialogue with it. The world around you fades to stillness. The wind moves softly through the trees, carrying the faint scent of salt from the sea. The cold remains, but it feels different now, almost companionable. You think of everything they endured, the storms, the hunger, the endless night, and how they emerge stronger each time. The freezing seas could never steal their fire. You sit beside the hearth, letting the warmth soak into your bones. The light flickers on your hands, on the faces of those around you, on the carved timbers of this fragile but enduring home. The Vikings have survived the sea not through defiance but through understanding. They listened to the ice, studied the wind, and turned hardship into wisdom. The fire begins to fade, its glow softening to embers. Someone stirs it gently, coaxing a last breath of light. You close your eyes, hearing the sea's slow rhythm beyond the shore. It feels less like danger now, and more like memory, like the heartbeat of the world itself. You realize the lesson they leave behind is simple. Warmth is not a gift of the world, but a choice made within it. It is built by hands, shared in laughter, kept alive by faith. The Vikings